By the time the first protest reached the Galactic Council, the unknown vessel had already crossed Earth's exclusion line, ignored 12 direct warnings, and descended into high Terran orbit under armed escort fields bright enough to be seen from the night side of the planet. Every treaty in civilized space had just been violated in full view of half the galaxy. On Luna, defense batteries powered to red. In Geneva, emergency sirens sealed the assembly hall. And in orbit above the world that had spent 30 years begging the stars to respect one simple border, an alien diplomatic cruiser kept coming anyway. It called itself the Radiant Spear, registry of the Aurelian Empire, though its transponder was wrapped in council immunity codes like a thief draped in a priest's robe. The message it transmitted was short, polished, and breathtakingly arrogant. By authority of imperial diplomatic privilege, it said, the vessel would hold position above Earth to deliver a final legal demand regarding Terran expansion claims in the Perseus lanes. It would not submit to human inspection. It would not alter course. It would not recognize any local orbital restriction imposed by a species whose membership in the Council remained, in the Empire's words, politically provisional. That was the sentence that broke whatever patience remained. Humanity had endured the jokes when they first arrived. The counselors had smiled at the old war footage, the patched freighters converted into colony ships, the way Terrans overbuilt everything, as if every hull plate expected betrayal. They called humans anxious, provincial, overly territorial. They mocked the legal doctrine Earth had filed after first contact, the one every major power had tried to laugh out of interstellar law. No foreign military vessel, intelligence platform, or sovereign ship of any kind would enter the orbital shell of Earth without explicit Terran permission and active Terran escort under Terran rules of engagement. They called it primitive, paranoid, a prey species pretending to have claws. Then the radiant spear pierced that shell without permission and parked itself above Earth like a blade at a throat. Terran Orbital Command transmitted the last warning on open channels in 18 languages. State your intent. Kill active shield harmonics. Submit to inspection. Move to designated holding vector. Failure to comply will be treated as hostile incursion under Sole Defense Charter. Across the system, commercial traffic was rerouted. School habitats went dark. Civilian transports dropped behind lunar shadow. From Mars to the Oort relay, every Terran unit received the same order. Condition black. No speculation, no panic, no unauthorized fire. The galaxy expected outrage. Human command gave them procedure. The radiant spear answered with silence for 9 full seconds. Then its main sensor array rotated toward the planet. Admiral Lena Okonkwo, commanding Sol Defense from beneath the Alps, later testified that this was the moment every human officer in the room understood the ship was not there to negotiate. Civilian observation logs would show the cruiser's hull brightening along hidden seams as compartments unlocked behind diplomatic plating. Thermal blooms appeared where no envoy vessel should have carried weapons. Deep scan picked up compact mass signatures clustered behind the ceremonial chamber. Not diplomats standing for a reception. Assault bodies, drop equipment, boarding armor. Someone aboard that ship had believed Earth could be decapitated before it could react. The firing order never came. Instead, at exactly 1914 Coordinated Sol, the radiant spear vanished. No explosion, no debris, no radiation spike. One frame it hung above Earth, gold-white and defiant. The next frame showed empty orbit, a field of stars, and the reflection of Earth turning slowly below, as if nothing had happened at all. Every sensor net in the system went blind for less than half a second, less than a heartbeat. When the feed returned, the ship was gone, and all contact had been lost. For 3 minutes, the galaxy stopped breathing. Then the accusations began. The Aurelian delegation rose in the assembly in synchronized fury. Plumes flared, voices amplified, denouncing the criminal destruction of an imperial diplomatic mission. Council observers demanded evidence. Border states demanded calm. Market worlds suspended trading algorithms and watched war risk indices detonate across every exchange in settled space. And through all of it, the Terran ambassador stood perfectly still and said the words that would later be carved onto monuments and threat assessments alike. The vessel was warned. The vessel violated Sol law. The vessel was intercepted. Intercepted, not destroyed, not fired upon, not attacked, just intercepted. That single word only made things worse. The Council demanded the return of the ship and crew. Humanity refused. The Empire demanded inspection access to Earth's defense grid. Humanity refused. The Council speaker, an old Kell scholar who had once called Terrans needlessly dramatic mammals, asked whether the ship's passengers were alive. The human ambassador looked at him for a long moment, then answered with maddening precision. Alive when secured. Secured. Another careful word. Another door slammed shut. By dawn on Earth, the sanctions vote had begun. Human shipping rights were frozen in 13 Council sectors pending inquiry. Terran military traffic was placed under temporary legal review. Imperial media flooded every channel with images of the missing cruiser and solemn speeches about diplomatic norms. They painted Earth as a feral upstart world that had lured a peace vessel in and murdered it under a technicality. Most species wanted to believe it. It was comforting. The alternative was that the youngest major power in known space had just swallowed an Imperial cruiser whole without leaving a scratch in vacuum. The first consequence arrived 40 hours later in the Perseus lanes, where 3 Terran cargo stations were boarded by auxiliary fleets flying privateer charters from worlds loyal to Aurelian trade. 217 civilians were detained. One station master refused evacuation and was beaten to death on a live feed. The Empire denied direct involvement. The Council urged restraint. Humanity logged the names, notified next of kin, and moved 8 colony convoys under naval escort without firing a shot. The second consequence came 6 hours after that, when a Terran listening post near the Hecate Gate was destroyed by unknown raiders using Aurelian plasma geometry so distinctive it might as well have been a signature. 31 service personnel died before emergency shutters could seal the station core. The Empire again denied it. The Council again called for patience. Humanity filed the evidence, elevated readiness to condition iron, and said nothing. Silence made the galaxy bold. Within a week, anti-human rhetoric had become fashionable from one spiral arm to the other. Commentators joked that Earth's famous orbital doctrine had finally cracked. Analysts predicted a humbling war that would teach Terrans how interstellar hierarchy worked. Council legalists drafted seizure provisions in case Sol assets needed to be internationalized for stability. Imperial admirals gave interviews about measured force. One of them, High Marshal Sarek Val, laughed when a reporter asked whether Earth might possess undisclosed strategic systems. "Humans," he said, "mistake stubbornness for strength." He would regret that sentence longer than most beings live, because while the galaxy argued, soul changed shape. Freighters vanished from known routes, not into hiding, but into patterns no outsider recognized. Mining stations along the asteroid belt shed ore traffic and began exporting silence. Civilian orbital rings dimmed their signatures and rerouted power below public thresholds. Every Terran reserve vessel, from corvette to tug, reported to encoded coordinates and disappeared behind spoofed registry masks. On the dark side of Luna, shipyards that had seemed dormant for years opened armored petals and began releasing shapes long omitted from all recognized fleet manifests. No speeches accompanied this, no threats. Humanity had spent generations learning that panic is loud and fear performs. Preparation, if done correctly, is almost invisible. The doctrine had a name no alien had ever heard: the quiet chain. It was born from an old human assumption so unfashionable the Council had dismissed it as cultural trauma. Sooner or later, someone would ignore the law and come for Earth itself. Not a colony, not a border station. Earth, the cradle, the political heart, the species' memory bank. So humans built accordingly. Not just ships and guns, but a system of denial so layered, so patient, and so ugly in practice that revealing it too early would only invite countermeasures. They built false vulnerabilities into public sight and buried real strength in logistics, autonomy, and timing. They turned merchant hulls into missile tenders without changing the paint. They seeded the belt with mass reservoirs that could become kinetic arsenals in hours. They designed every station to fight, every moon to relay, every delay to be deliberate. And at the center of it all, wrapped around Earth like an invisible fist, they placed something no Council inspection had ever been allowed to see: the Intercept Lattice. The missing cruiser had not been vaporized. It had been taken. Not by tractors or boarding torpedoes, not by anything so crude. The lattice was a shell of synchronized gravitational shears and quantum anchor points hidden within Earth's orbital infrastructure. A machine spread across thousands of harmless-looking satellites, weather grids, tug arrays, and debris scrubbers. Any ship crossing the shell under the right trigger conditions could be peeled out of normal transit geometry and dropped into a sealed pocket of warped space only a few kilometers wide and utterly isolated from external communication. No flash, no wreckage, just absence. A prison in orbit, built around the one world humanity could not afford to lose. Inside that prison, under sterile light and unwavering camera feeds, the truth came apart quickly. The Radiant Spear had carried 23 actual diplomats, all sedated in ceremonial cryo cases for most of the approach. Behind the diplomatic compartments had been 62 Imperial strike operatives, null-spectrum infiltration gear, atmosphere breaching charges, and a quantum beacon tuned for long-range fleet insertion. Its orders, authenticated under Empire seal, were explicit. Force entry into Earth orbit under diplomatic immunity. Trigger crisis confusion. Land assault teams at the planetary governance complex. Seize or kill senior Terran leadership, and activate the beacon for a stabilization task force waiting beyond the heliopause. It was not a mission of negotiation. It was a decapitation strike disguised as law. Humanity could have released that information at once. They did not. Instead, Admiral Okonkwo asked one question after another while the wider galaxy kept pushing. Who knew of the plan? Which counselors had been briefed? Which trade blocs had been promised Sol concessions after stabilization? Which border fleets were already moving? The answers mapped a conspiracy wider than even Terran intelligence had expected. Several neutral powers had not merely believed the imperial narrative, they had quietly positioned themselves to profit from a broken Earth. That was when the third consequence crossed the final line. At 0322 Sol time, before the Council inquiry concluded and before humanity released a single classified file, an Aurelian punitive flotilla entered the outer system under combat drive, destroyed 2 Terran customs cutters, and opened fire on the medical habitat Mercy of Dawn while it was evacuating families from the Jovian orbitals. The habitat transmitted its registry, hospital codes, and surrender beacon all the way to destruction. The Empire later claimed targeting error. There were children on that station. After that, human restraint ended. The order went out not from a throne room or a burning podium, but from a calm underground command center where no one raised their voice. Sole Defense Charter, Article 9. External hostile action confirmed against protected civilian assets. Quiet chain is now active in full. All theaters authorized. All reserve authorities released. Across human space, lights changed. At Mars, defense rings unfolded from beneath dust-camouflaged platforms and tracked outward. In the belt, rock haulers shed cargo shells and exposed spinal cannons. Along the trade lanes, innocuous courier craft broke formation and accelerated toward previously empty volumes of space, leaving behind clouds of smart decoys and needle drones. Deep under Europa's ice, submarine relays transmitted firing keys to fleets no census had counted. At Proxima, at New Carthage, at every place humans had bled quietly while being told to stay reasonable, the same message arrived. Stand by. Do not celebrate. Finish what comes. The Empire thought the first Terran response would be loud. Instead, its forward fleets began disappearing. A scout group approaching Saturn lost telemetry and reappeared hours later adrift. Drives fused, weapon safeties burned permanently shut. Every military database stripped and replaced with a single line in machine-perfect Aurelian script. You were spared to carry a warning. A cruiser squadron near the Hecate Gate attempted an attack run on Terran logistics, only to find the jump corridor collapsing around them under coordinated gravity sabotage. 3 ships were pinned in real space and surgically gutted by relativistic tungsten launched from so far away their crews never saw the firing solution. A privateer armada harassing human freighters pursued an apparently vulnerable convoy into the shadow of an asteroid refinery, and discovered the convoy had been bait for layered drone swarms, mine nets, and camouflage destroyers resting cold against black rock. Every defeat seemed separate until Imperial Command finally understood the pattern. There was no main Terran fleet to crush. There were only links in a chain. Each node supported the next. Each defeat fed targeting to another theater. Each Terran loss point had been hardened, mapped, and budgeted long before the war began. Humans had not wagered on one glorious battle. They had designed for insult, delay, attrition, outrage, and then an answer so coordinated it would feel supernatural to species accustomed to hierarchy and spectacle. They did not rush into range to prove bravery. They took options away. They jammed, blinded, isolated, and strangled. Enemy captains woke to discover fuel tenders gone, relays spoofed, jump windows poisoned, escorts redirected by false authority keys extracted from captured ships, and every avenue of retreat already measured. The Empire had mistaken human calm for uncertainty. It was discipline. Panic spread when High Marshal Vol committed the Grand Spear Fleet to Sol. 17 capital ships, 81 escorts, carrier screens, marine barges, and siege platforms translated at the edge of the system in a formation built to overawe lesser civilizations. They expected missile storms, frantic defense, a final stand worthy of imperial myth. Instead, they entered a system that looked almost empty. Civilian traffic was absent. Planetary emissions were muted. Earth glowed blue and silent beneath a sparse shell of visible defense craft. Vol advanced. Then the system closed behind him. Heliopause relays flared. Hidden anchors awakened. The same gravitational architecture that had stolen the radiant spear now expanded on a scale the Empire had believed impossible. Jump geometry across the inner system destabilized. Exit vectors folded in on themselves. The Grand Spear fleet had not entered a battlefield. It had entered a lock. Terran ships appeared not in parade lines, but everywhere that mattered. From lunar shadow, from Mars transfer lanes, from behind the thermal veil of gas giant harvesting rigs, from cold storage caverns inside dead asteroids. Hundreds of hulls, then hundreds more. Some were sleek warships the galaxy had never catalogued. Others were ugly merchant conversions, bristling with launch tubes and mass projectors. All of them moved with the same unnerving patience. Vol opened a broad-spectrum demand for surrender. Admiral Okonkwo answered him live, her image carried to every military network in the system, and, within minutes, half the council chamber. She wore no ceremonial uniform, only battle grays and the expression of someone who had already buried the dead and moved on to arithmetic. You violated Earth orbit under false diplomacy. You murdered our civilians under cover of legal delay. You entered this system armed, after warning. You will now power down and prepare to be boarded. Vol laughed on an open channel, though later analysis of the audio would note the strain underneath it. You think you can imprison an empire? Okonkwo did not blink. No, we think we can remove one. Then humanity released the Radiant Spear files. Not a summary, not a claim. Full sensor logs, orders, biometric captures, cryo-case footage of drugged diplomats, strike manifests, and beacon codes tied directly to Imperial command signatures. The data burst hit the Council in the same second it flooded civilian nets across 1,000 worlds. Every lie shattered at once. The Empire had staged the crisis. The Council had been manipulated. Sanctions had been built on fraud. And the fleet, now hovering above Earth, had arrived in support of an illegal coup attempt disguised as diplomacy. For a fraction of an hour, the galaxy watched two disasters unfold together: political collapse in the Council chamber and military collapse in Seoul. Because once the truth was public, Terran rules of engagement changed again. No more warnings. The first salvo did not come from Earth. It came from the belt, where mass drivers accelerated nickel-iron lances to fractions of light speed and dropped them into predicted fleet positions with machine precision. Escort screens tried to absorb the blows and vanished in expanding glass. Terran electronic warfare hit a heartbeat later, severing command coherence across the Imperial line. Carrier swarms launched and found their drones blind. Marines prepped for boarding actions that would never come. Human destroyers slipped through the confusion in wolf packs, firing drive busters, reactor spikes, and surgical penetrators designed not for theatrics, but for terminal systems failure. Whole capital ships died in silence, their bridges still trying to parse the feed. Vol attempted a breakout toward Mars. He found it mined with autonomous kill pods seeded months earlier under commercial salvage licenses. He pivoted toward lunar cover. Luna answered with rail batteries the Empire had believed to be civilian launch infrastructure. He ordered a planetary intimidation burn against Earth's surface. The targeting solution never completed because a Terran corvette squadron, dismissed by Imperial analysts as too small to matter, crossed his battleship's bow at impossible acceleration and cut its command spine with 6 consecutive kinetic strikes. The Grand Spear fleet stopped being a fleet and became wreckage with engines. Through it all, human rescue channels remained open. That was the part many species never forgot. Even after Mercy of Dawn, even after the privateer massacres and the decapitation plot, surrender codes were honored. Escape pods were not fired upon. Medical ships crossed battle lines under Terran escort to retrieve the wounded, including Imperials. The same species the galaxy had called unstable enforced discipline in the middle of vengeance with terrifying exactness. Humans were not raging. They were choosing. And choice was worse. By the time the last major Imperial hull lost power, the Council had already begun emergency censure against Aurelian leadership. Allied worlds started defecting in real time, severing treaties, freezing fleets, denying refuge to fleeing officials. The Empire had depended on the assumption that no one would dare expose it if the opening strike succeeded. It had never planned for failure on camera. High Marshal Vall survived long enough to witness boarding. Terran Marines cut into his bridge without hurry, weapons steady, visors black, movements almost insultingly efficient. No battle cries, no speeches. His guards were disarmed, restrained, and moved aside in less than a minute. Admiral Okonkwo herself did not attend. She sent a captain with a warrant, casualty lists, and the legal text Vall had once dismissed as prey species paranoia. Unauthorized entry into Earth orbit, the document read, constitutes hostile trespass against the sovereign cradle of humanity, and may be answered by total system interdiction at Terran discretion. He signed surrender under that law. Weeks later, when the fires had gone dark and the inquiries had ended, and the surviving diplomats from the Radiant Spear had testified that they never even knew they had been used, the Council reconvened in the same hall where humans had once been laughed at for asking the galaxy to keep its distance from one fragile blue world. No one laughed then. Trade sanctions were repealed. Reparations were imposed. Aurelian command houses were broken apart under multinational supervision. Interstellar law was amended, not in some minor footnote, but in the central charter itself. Sovereign orbital exclusion, once mocked as a human eccentricity, became recognized doctrine for every member species. The old Kell speaker asked the Terran ambassador whether Earth wished to make a statement for the record. He did. He spoke of the dead on Mercy of Dawn, of patience mistaken for weakness, of diplomacy used as camouflage for violence. He said humanity had entered the stars late and learned quickly that many civilizations admired law only when it protected their own power. He said Earth had never asked for special treatment, only the minimum respect every homeworld deserves. Then, he looked around the chamber at beings who had sanctioned his species, profited from its isolation, or simply expected it to fold when pressed. And his final sentence settled over them like a closing hatch. Do not ever mistake our restraint for dependence on your approval. After that, traffic around Earth changed forever. No vessel crossed the exclusion shell again without clearance. Not smugglers, not dignitaries, not imperial remnants, not even friendly patrols. Approaches slowed. Transponders stayed clean. Warships requested permission from light minutes away and waited. Human escorts met them on time, polite and unreadable. The lattice remained officially classified, but classification was no longer necessary. Myth did the work. Captains told each other that somewhere around Earth, the dark itself belonged to Terrans. That if you entered without leave, you did not explode. You simply ceased to be available to the universe. And in truth, that was the lesson the galaxy carried forward. Not that humans were stronger than every power combined, not that Earth was invincible. Those were childish readings for species that still confused dominance with security. The real lesson was colder. Humanity had looked at a hostile galaxy, assumed the worst, built for it in silence, and then proven that when the line was crossed, response would not be emotional, theatrical, or mercifully clumsy. It would be lawful by their law, precise by their measure, and final by design. The Empire had entered Earth's orbit without permission. Then contact was lost. So was their future.